Wonderful. Good afternoon to some of you. Good night to others. Good morning to those of us in Texas. Great joy to be with you. I really appreciated the range of papers from yesterday's session. And I congratulate Martin and really all the team at CMCS Oxford in convening this conference. It felt a decade ago that there just wasn't a lot out there on Muslims who seriously read the Bible. And even yesterday, again, my world was expanded. My reading list keeps growing. And hopefully what I'm introducing you to today or the conversation we'll have today is yet another step in that. Now, I work in, as he said, in 19th century modern South Asia. And Sir Syed Ahmad Khan is broadly known in my context. He might not be known in yours, but instead of spending a lot of time on his biography and history in the context today, because I can point you to many good options for that. Not least among those is the book that Martin referenced to you, The Gospel According to Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, that I had the joy and privilege of translating and editing with Christian Troll and Basharat Mughal, as we brought that lesser known but concerted study of the Gospel of Matthew, really only the first 5 chapters, but the care with which Sir Syed put into that project is finally now broadly available to the public. So you could look in that. I will also not spend a lot of time taking you into the context of India when Syed Ahmad was writing, though that itself could be a lecture its entirety. He lived at a time in the War of 1857 when he experienced personal disaster, really. His mother died possibly of starvation. His brother was executed. It was a time of terrible violence and oppression. And in some ways, we come at his writings today realizing that it was someone who lived to see the end of the world as he knew it, as Sheila McDowell appropriately stated. And I'm mindful of that, beginning this as we think of what's going on today in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and so many locations. So we're not reading in a vacuum. We're reading in a very real context, as he was and as we are today. So I'll forgo some of that. But suffice it to say that Sir Syed Ahmad's Urdu exegesis of the Bible, which he did, particularly in Tabin al-Kalam, which are 3 volumes of a project done between kind of 1860 and 1865, but really began far ahead of that and to some degree continued over 40 years into his Tafsir al-Quran. They present a picture for us of revelation that comes in a chorus. And by chorus, I mean multiple voices singing from one sheet, so to speak, or led by one divine conductor. And in his mind, the divine messages, the prophetic messages, instruct divine law, and yet nature's message. He was fascinated with science. Nature's message, which he regarded as the original Sharia, is no less audible, though it's not in a book of its own. He sought to harmonize one with the other without contradictions, because he believed that the word was in the work and the work was in the word. This was so in the beginning, he said, and ever more shall be. And that is at the heart of his understanding. And I would say the line of scholars that he progressed in, their understanding of Tawheed, right? The essence of Islam, the integral coherence of the divine word and the divine work displayed in both natural and prophetic revelation. So he was a student and educated in a family of Sufi philosophers, so highly conversant with, say, for example, what Dr. Morrissey introduced us to yesterday in his presentation of Al-Jilli. And he was convinced of the importance of Nazm, of the textual coherence and the textual order of the Quran, as introduced by Dr. McCoy yesterday in his work of Bikai. Bikai would have been someone readily available on his shelf, on Sir Syed's shelf, and that we see him much more in his students in the next generations. And he would have likely, Sir Syed would have likely concurred with many of the ideas and maybe even agreed or disagreed some with someone like Abdul Kalam Azad or Tabatabai, whose writings we see in Dr. Siri's book, which I happen to keep right here next to my shelf. I've greatly appreciated his work. And he goes into great depth there. But in our brief time together today, I want to move past the fact that Sir Syed expressed a very high regard of biblical scripture, both the Old Testament and New Testament in their entireties, and even the detailed rationale that he presented to undergird this view, found most clearly in Tabyin al-Kalam, his commentary on the New Testament, and particularly in that volume 1, where he lays out 10 discourses on why a Muslim should read the Bible, right? And instead, I want to focus our time on what he does with that, how he draws from the Bible to interpret and ponder the meaning of the Quran. And I'd like to do that by considering his presentation of a particularly contentious issue, one that is really a recurring difficulty in the history of Muslim Christian relations, and namely, of course, by that, I mean the crucifixion and the ascension of Jesus Christ. So first, let me briefly set the stage by introducing how Sir Syed conceptualized prophetic revelation in the Bible. So I'm going to give a very quick snapshot of that, just to help us move forward and identify some terms he's working on, and then we'll shift to what he actually said. So he's very intent on the method he uses to conceptualize prophetic revelation, whether this is found in the Bible, whether it's found in the Quran, or even if it's recorded in Hadith. He applied a very specific taxonomy drawn from the Ilm al-Hadith that was derived from the works of eminent jurist Idris al-Shafi back in the 9th century. He died around 820, and which continues in mainstream use today. Now, it's important for me to just pause here for a second and remember that Sir Syed in his early days was a member of the Al-Hadith group, which is a group that was intent on reifying the Hadith and identifying a way forward for the Muslim community under occupation in India along those lines. But he's going to experience a dramatic reversal. The taxonomy classified the revealed word of God as kalam ilahi or wahi as either matlu or ghair matlu. So Abdullah Saeed is helpful here in helping us understand that this taxonomy recognized the Quran and Sunnah as having equal religio-ethical authority. So Syed Ahmad's originality in this is not in creating the terms, but in applying them to what he sees in front of him in the Bible. As Syed Ahmad clarified in no uncertain terms, God protect us, right? Na'udh billah. The revelation of the earlier prophets, the Sabqeen prophets, is no less than that which was granted to the Prophet Muhammad. So Syed Ahmad specified that Muslims should not qualify one type of revelation, matlu versus ghair matlu, as greater than the other, as both of them, in matters of religion, he says, both are equal. Deen ka muamle mein dono barabar hai, as he writes in Urdu. He's writing in his Urdu exegesis. So he provided unequivocal assessment of the value of biblical revelation in light and in relation to that of the Quran. Syed Ahmad functionally expanded in this way the canon of Islam. In a sense, he is trying to demonstrate what happens if we, as Muslims, receive the Bible not as opposition to the Quran, but as part of the canon, that which is put in front of them to study and understand prophetic and natural revelation. Well, as Suraya Hussain at Aligarh, the university founded by Sir Syed and that still carries his name, as she observed, his work had a positive assessment of the Bible in having that has had a lasting and enduring impact on Urdu Quranic exegesis. And so it's not uncommon, she goes on to say, to even today find extensive quotations or references to not only the Bible, Old and New Testament, but also to Christian and Jewish scholarship, biblical scholarship in Urdu commentaries today. Indeed, as Abdul Majid Daryabadi, who died in 1977, he's broadly regarded as one of the leading Urdu commentators in the past century. He said, God forgive Syed Ahmad for the work he has done. He has revised 1,400 years of history for the Christians and taken upon himself the task of exonerating Jews and Christians for their tampering with the scripture. So whatever Syed Ahmad did, he had some type of impact in the continuity of Urdu exegesis. And so though Daryabadi and many others in India and Pakistan and South Asia today may remain unconvinced of Sayyid Ahmed's estimation of the Bible's authority, still we find today that the Bible is frequently cited and discussed within Urdu exegesis. But now let's turn to Tafsir al-Quran and examine the outworking of this positive assessment. And it's vital to recall that the resounding theme in Tafsir, right, in his commentary of the Quran, is not the Bible, it's the reconciliation of reason and revelation. That's what he's interested in. His goal is not to support the Bible per se, but rather to demonstrate his rationalist, naturalist, interpretive method. In short form, the logic of Sayyid Ahmed's position is as follows. If God were to extend into the created order, then God's divine singularity would be compromised by the melding of the creator and the creator. Sorry, the creator and the created. Thus, any scriptural portion, any pericope that circumvents plain reason must be interpreted figuratively. So anytime we see supernatural activity described, that must be interpreted figuratively, because God would never interfere with the natural processes of creation to alter those or to press pause on those. So as Sayyid Ahmed unequivocally clarifies, I apply the law of nature to Kitab, to Scripture, and to Sunnah. The episodes of Jesus's life referred to in Tafsir are therefore read accordingly. Supernatural activity is impossible and contrary to the will and word of God. So in his estimation, there are miracles, but these are not supernatural. The universality of the Quran, as Sayyid Ahmed explained, is miraculous because it remains enduringly relevant in every generation, despite the growth of human knowledge. Yet all matter is contingent. Were there no Mecca or Medina, and Sayyid Ahmed explained, there would be no Muhammad. Were there no Muhammad, there would be no Quran. Thus, in Tafsir, the Quran, Hadith, and Bible are read according to Sayyid Ahmed's principle of simple reason, in light of which historical elements must be reconstructed and with a distinct awareness of existing Christian and Jewish communities and their scriptural tradition. In this lengthy section that we're going to look at today, which comprises more than 45 pages, Sayyid Ahmed turns attention to the miracles pertaining to Christ, such as his miraculous birth, speaking in infancy, his raising the dead. But within that, he gives the largest portion to the ascension of Christ. And within that, he discusses the crucifixion. In his reading of Surah Al-Imran, particularly the third para, the Qur'an 355, Sayyid Ahmed embarked on an extended discussion. And about 15 pages are going to be concentrated on what we're looking at today. So the commentary begins with a description of the travail of Jesus's crucifixion in graphic detail. So that in itself is astounding. A bold image of the cross is produced at the top of the page to clarify beyond any shadow of a doubt the subject under discussion. It is important to observe that this is not the first occasion to which Sayyid Ahmed has expressed his views on the crucifixion. So we're clearly talking about the cross. There's a big sign of the cross taking up a portion of the page in his commentary, and he's going to describe what happened there and narrate the events, and then move on to an evaluation of the historicity and then a discussion of its significance. But to put that in context, we remember that he's been working on this for 40 years. So it's not the first time he's thought about this. In Tabyin Part 3, for example, his writings on the New Testament, he describes Jesus' ordeal and physical death on a Roman cross by saying, in his 33rd year, Hazrat Masih was handed over to the Jews by Judas Iscariot and arrested, and they stretched him on a cross according to their understanding, killed him forever, but he rose from the dead and ascended to heaven. And he references the book of Acts, chapter 2. In Tafsir now that he's moved into a different phase of his thinking, he's become, in his own language, a naturi, a naturalist, and this idea has crystallized in his mind and in his method. He reflects on this event with new eyes. So he's going to, again, uphold the historicity of Jesus' suffering and death, but not of the resurrection and ascension. The former was a natural event and therefore is read literally. The latter, however, is not and therefore must be read figuratively. The Quran accepts Jesus' physical death, according to Sayyid Ahmad's argument. He supports this conclusion philologically from within Muslim tradition. There are 3 verses that support a physical death: 348, which in our contemporary usage would be 55, 5117, and 1933, and only 1 verse that appears to disagree, and that is what we're looking at today, which is 4156, or in our current use, 157. This last verse, he explains, holds the key to unlocking the Quranic view of Jesus' crucifixion and the subsequent confusion regarding his death. Again, it contains the only mention of the cross in the Quran and is the only a verse that appears to reject Jesus' death. He was killed. We have killed the Messiah Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of God. They did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, though it was made to appear like that to them. Those that disagreed about him are full of doubt, with no knowledge to follow, only supposition. They certainly did not kill him. Sayyid Ahmad, however, would render the meaning of this verse very differently than what we hear today, citing explanations by Ibn Abbas and Ibn Ishaq, as found in Al-Razi's Al-Tafsir al-Kabir. That's the commentary that he draws to the most. He argues that the Arabic terms in these verses, mutawafika and tawafaitani, were understood by the earliest Muslims to clearly indicate physical death. He recounts 3 examples recorded in Tafsir al-Kabir to substantiate not only the acceptability, but also the prevalence of the view supporting this meaning among the most revered representatives of the early community. Al-Razi reports furthermore the exchange between them concerning precisely how long Jesus remained dead once Allah caused him to die. So from Sayyid Ahmad's reading of Al-Razi and of the early commentators, he's arguing that, yeah, there was agreement among many early scholars of the historicity of his death. In fact, they discussed how long he was dead for before being raised up. So let's see this. The first opinion is that of Wahb ibn Munabi, who died between 725 and 737, of the second generation of the Tabi'in, who was esteemed for his knowledge of Jewish tradition, Israeliyat, and he claimed that Jesus remained dead for 3 hours before being resuscitated and taken up to heaven. Ibn Ishaq, who died circa 768, who collected oral traditions and composed one of the first biographies of the Prophet, claimed that Jesus remained dead for closer to 7 hours. Malik ibn Anas, who died in 795, a jurist and revered compiler of traditions, argued that Allah caused Jesus to die at the instant of raising him to heaven. Hence, in Sayyid Ahmad's view, there is sound precedence for acceptance that the Quran reported Jesus's physical death. To make his case, Sayyid Ahmad examines Q4, the verse that appears to contradict the other 3. If properly read, he claims, this verse does not reject Jesus' crucifixion and death at all. To refute this well-established and normative view, he presents 2 arguments. He presents 2 arguments, one that's derived from structure, the structure of the passage, and the other from the laws of nature. So we're seeing 2 of his key elements of his hermeneutical method being brought to interpret this verse. Since the Quran does not contradict itself, he argues this verse must be interpreted in congruity with the other accounts mentioned above that indicate the factuality of Jesus' physical death. So in accordance with his own interpretive principles, established and carried forward from his earliest writings, Sayyid Ahmad attributes interpretive priority to evidence located within the text over that from external sources. That means he's going to look for meaning within the Quran itself, rather than appeal to examples from the Hadith or from other sources. So he's going to give priority to what the Quran says about itself, or the internal conversation within the Quran. Thus he reads the phrase, "They did not kill him, nor did they crucify him," not to deny the historicity of the events, but rather to repudiate the idea that the Jews had power to accomplish that which would be contrary to the will of Allah. So no person has power to go against the will of Allah. Though it is conceivable that one person might be mistaken for another, which is the explanation frequently supplied to displace Jesus from the cross, Sayyid Ahmed holds that this interpretation is fundamentally flawed. As a matter of principle, a combination of unsound hadith and exegetical opinion, he says, should not overturn clear Quranic testimony. The rejection of Jesus' crucifixion is not required by the text, and so it should be read as a historical event. Second, Sayyid Ahmed challenges the customary interpretation of this verse because it violates the laws of nature. In the standard narrative, someone else endured the cross, standard narrative in popular parlance, I mean. Jesus was spared suffering and physical death through a supernatural rescue. This account, however, contravenes the order of God's work in creation. As in the case of Jesus' birth, Sayyid Ahmed interprets the account of his death according to the laws of nature. So his exposition, Quran 4156, is original and it merits a little detailed consideration. So let's just turn our attention to that for a second. He presents the rationale for his interpretation by identifying a literary structure in the passage. The style of his writing is indicative of his thought process, so it's helpful to reproduce it here. This would probably be the one point where I wish I had made a PowerPoint for you today. But I can follow yesterday's precedent and point you to the book, and you can read it with greater care. But traditional exegesis explains the four elements of the passage in this way. First, the subject, meaning the one who is on the cross. Two, the similitude, what appeared to be. Three, the reason for the similitude. Four, the audience. To whom did this appear to be? Now, the customary reading among Muslims in 19th century India, as it is for many of us today, the customary reading has understood these elements in the following manner. Who was actually on the cross? Well, Simon, Cyrene, or Judas Iscariot. So for those who do not accept that Jesus was punished on the cross, who was on the cross? Simon or Judas. What appeared to be. Number two, what appeared to be? It appeared that Jesus was on the cross, but he was not. Three, the cause. Another was caused to appear to be Jesus and to die in his place. Four, who was the audience? The audience were the Jewish observers, the people who were in the audience observing what was going on. Now, Sayyid Ahmed challenges this reading and claims that it should not be read this way. Instead, it should be read in the following way. Who was on the cross? Jesus. Two, what appeared to be? Jesus appeared to have been defeated. Three, the cause. Well, the cause for this was the condition of his body. Four, who was the audience? Again, the Jewish observers. So having considered these variables, Sayyid Ahmed first underscores the fact that element 1 and 4 are unambiguous. They are demonstrable and historic. So Jesus was on the cross as seen by Jewish observers. This can be proved by basic observable reason and is therefore accepted as historically accurate. However, as the customary rendering of elements 2 and 3 requires supernatural intervention, which Sayyid Ahmed categorically rejects, a plausible explanation must be sought. The customary reading entails a divine rescue where someone else was mistaken for Jesus and suffered in his place, while the actual Jesus was taken up to heaven unharmed. The issue concerns similitude, right? Mutashabihat, or what appeared to have occurred. For Sayyid Ahmed, it appears that Jesus' opponents succeeded. They succeeded in thwarting God's plan, but this was not the case. The verse from his reading challenges claims to have killed Jesus rather than Jesus having willingly been crucified. This leads to a subsequent question. If death is natural and inevitable, what were the circumstances of Jesus' death? In Said Ahmed's opinion, the evidence is not conclusive. Christ was crucified, and he certainly died either on the cross or in the tomb, or perhaps later at an unknown time. He died his own death, which is whichever death God has allotted for him. Quotes. In final assessment, Said Ahmed reasons that Jesus' followers likely concealed his grave so that enemies could not do mischief, as similar to what the followers of Ali, the prophet's martyred cousin and son-in-law, had done with Ali's body. In the absence of a grave and corpse, stories arose of a heavenly ascension. Said Ahmed considers it possible that Jesus' state of extreme exhaustion could have caused bystanders to believe that he had passed away, that he had died, but in fact, he died later. He strengthened this case with an argument cited from two examples from within Christian tradition of persons who survived crucifixion. That means they were put on a cross and suffered under Roman rule, but survived. And given the testimony of others who suffered longer than Jesus suffered and yet survived. And so Said Ahmed concludes that it is unlikely that Jesus would have died so quickly. He also considers, however, the extensive torture that Jesus endured and the excessive loss of blood caused by the severity of his wounds. Thus, it is reasonable to understand that Christ died either on the cross or in the tomb. Said Ahmed remains committed to his acceptance of the present biblical text. And that's what's so difficult for many of us who are following his argument. He reasons that if Jesus died on the cross or immediately thereafter in the tomb, it would create discontinuity within the gospel accounts. Because if Jesus did not survive the cross, how does one account for his later interactions with the living? Were these imagined encounters in the upper room with his many followers, where Jesus ate and drank food with disciples after the crucifixion? Unfortunately, for those of us who are curious, Said Ahmed does not pursue the discussion any further, but leaves it at that. Rather, he gives a protracted personal reflection, and he simply concludes that Jesus died a natural death and was buried in an unknown location. The Quran is content not to specify the precise circumstances of Jesus' death, and this was sufficient for Said Ahmed as well. So in summary, the Gospels and the Quran agree on the historicity of the crucifixion, and it was up to Christian interpreters, he would say, to account for the subsequent interactions in the New Testament that would contradict a physical death upon the cross. But for Said Ahmed, he feels like he has resolved that by requiring figurative interpretations of anything that would go beyond that which is not supernatural. A further element in this passage is highly significant. Said Ahmed claims that the Muslim rejection of Jesus's crucifixion and the subsequent interpretation of Q4156 was not indigenous to Muslim thinking, but was a reactionary view that developed in response to Christian pressure. So this is quite innovative. He's saying that rejection of the crucifixion was not indigenous to Muslim thinkers. This came up later in response to Christians who were pressurizing Muslims in debates. He says rejection of the crucifixion was a later development caused by encounters with heretical Christian sects. Though specific citations are not offered, he claims that this idea developed later amidst an atmosphere of communal tension. When the Ulama-e-Islam heard from some Christian firqa, from Christian sects, the saying that it was either Simon or Judas who was on the cross, they immediately changed the meaning of the Quran, end quotes. Though this idea may initially sound extreme and highly unlikely to some of us, it is interesting to note that even recently in Todd Lawson's convincing examination, Said Ahmed may have a point here. He may have been correct in this. Lawson demonstrates that the exegetical history of this birth was far from monolithic. The earliest statement of Muslim rejection of the cross appeared quite late and in a Christian source. Indeed, there is no record of Muslim rejection of Jesus' crucifixion before the accusation made that way by John of Damascus, who died around 749, who claimed that the Muslim proponents of Doceticism, that Muslims were proponents of Doceticism, a view deemed heretical by Orthodox Christians, who similarly posited that Jesus only appeared to die. In the absence of citations inside Ahmad's text, it's difficult to do more than to note and observe his opinion. But this again raises intriguing questions, however, pertaining to the sources that were available to him and the environment in which he was asking these questions. It's interesting, in a writing by Gabriel Said Reynolds, a very similar point is made, looking at the violence. It's from a Jewish tractate. But again, in most of the elements that we're seeing here, there's a polemical aspect to it that's causing, whether it's intentional or not, causing a polarity upon the issue of the cross, whereby Muslims believe this way, Christians believe that way. And so that boundary is important to observe. Although Sayyid Ahmad's source is not presented, the obscurity of his position and maybe the originality of his position is something that could lead to further research. In summary, Sayyid Ahmad challenges the customary interpretation of Jesus's death, the Muslim customary interpretation of Jesus' death, and the Christian customary interpretation. He concludes that this was an issue of mutashabihat, right? Which by that we mean what is in doubt, what is not clear. He says it wasn't clear, but people proceed as if it were, in this certainty as if it were. He says commentators have glossed over the historical record by overemphasizing one particular portion of a verse in order to overturn what was plainly stated in 3 other verses of the Quran. Though careful to state that this is not his own belief, he provides a detailed and objective explanation of the Christian doctrine of the atonement, right, within his commentary, which is perhaps unprecedented in the tafsir genre, to see someone try to explain the doctrine of atonement from a Christian perspective, and I would say quite balanced Christian perspective within a tafsir. Inside Ahmad's personal interpretation, the way of Calvary, as he calls it, was one of tragic catharsis rather than atoning sacrifice. Jesus died the death of a martyr. The salvific accomplishment in the death of Christ was not atonement, but rather it demonstrates faithfulness to God unto death. Sayyid Ahmad finds great significance in the cross. Had his description been more succinct, it might have been regarded as merely an informative summary. But the narrative of the suffering on the cross is prolonged and provides excruciating detail. In the account, he shifts into what is unmistakably a lament, reminiscent in form and purpose of the requiems, the marcia, that are pervasive in the Shia literature. The hands are stretched out, he recounts, and nailed deep into the beam, in quotes. The details do more than inform. As you read them, they evoke emotion. The reader's guided not only to accept the factuality of Jesus having been hung on the cross, but also to mourn. There uses the word matam, to mourn. And so to emotionally participate in the event through the reading. Jesus' martyrdom is likened to that of Hussein at Karbala, and his holy and innocent suffering is similarly to be mourned. Sayyid Ahmad concludes his consideration of the Quranic account of the crucifixion by disclosing a profoundly personal connection to this event. He writes, "Thousands of Muslims live with doubt in their hearts over so many issues, including this one. But there are those in Islam, such as myself, who believe this without a doubt. Such seekers have always been called kafir, even today. But one's faith is visible to God." It can be inferred from this reflection that this issue, the issue of presenting an innovative explanation, of boldly, courageously pursuing new alternatives. And that sense, that pain of being excluded and reviled as an unbeliever was something that he had experienced before. It's symptomatic, really, of a wider state of Muslim-Christian relations, one would say. Christians and Muslims remain at an impasse on many issues. Christians have not positively assessed the role of Muhammad, for example, and to use his word, mutashabihat, perhaps because they are in doubt. Their understanding is lacking, even as is that of Sayyid Ahmad's sharpest criticism of his assessment of the Bible and of aspects of Christian belief. But the faithful, he quotes, go on as he says, have always been taken to the gallows, to the sulli, which is a word for the cross. In this way, Sayyid Ahmad places himself within the legacy of Jesus, Ali, and Hussein as one who has been misunderstood, wrongly accused, and who is willing to remain faithful even unto death. Now, despite heavy criticism from his readership, past and present, Sayyid Ahmad insists unapologetically that the Quran should be read as accepting Jesus' crucifixion and physical death, but also as rejecting even the possibility of his or anyone else's heavenly ascension. Conclusion. Now, Christians are often excited to hear of Muslim support for the biblical text, particularly from such a highly esteemed public figure, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, but then feel deflated in the final outcome of his exegesis. Syed Ahmad reads the Bible seriously, but he does so through an interpretive lens that presents a very different picture than that regarded by many Christians. This was an experience keenly felt among his first Christian readers in this context, from among the indigenous church, the Indian church. Some, like Reverend Rajab Ali, noted that whether it was the intention of Syed Ahmad or not, his deconstruction of the text caused more damage to their faith and to the missionary cause than even the works of Rahmatullah Kairanvi, broadly regarded as the leading anti-Christian polemicist of the day. So he's comparing Syed Ahmad, who's supposed to be writing very positively about the Bible and an encourager in some ways for those who are looking positively at the Bible. But he says, in effect, reading this had a more of a devastating effect than the sharp and direct attack on the text by someone like Kairanvi. But Christ's supernatural power was a mainstay of Christian proclamation and a primary reason why many had placed faith upon him. Similar responses were given of disheartening responses were given by Muslims as well, because not only by rejecting the supernatural is he shifting the conversation away from the miraculous evidences for Christ, it takes with it some of the cherished beliefs and miraculous events within Islam and that are central to Muslim faith as well. As his biographer and dear friend Hali recounted, Syed Ahmad managed to disagree with just about everyone at some point and to finally unite the fractured Indian Muslim community, if only in their joint condemnation of his person. So the focus of their ire, however, their anger, was not upon his engagement with the Bible. As noted in this conference, and I think we're seeing it over and over again in the paper, engagement with the Bible already existed in this context. And we're becoming keenly aware that it was more prevalent than we knew. And as I've already stated, it continues within the Urdu tafsir genre even today. And I would say at an increasing pace, not a lessening pace. The issue is not particularly with Syed Ahmad's view of the crucifixion, as many reformist interpreters were willing to ponder or even to concede its historicity. Part of the issue is the manner this logic impinges on the central miracle within Islam, which of course refers to the nature of the Quran itself. One approach or one consequence of his approach, challenging as it may be, has been to cause readers to come away and to step out of their comfort zones and predisposed positions and to ponder what the text could mean from a new light. One among these pertinent to this study with the cross in mind, is the let me be sure I have time to carry this all the way through. I think I do. I'll be mindful. One among these pertinent to the study at hand is the actual purpose of the cross, the meaning and significance of the cross. If the historicity of the crucifixion is granted, which Sayyid Ahmad claims is clearly defined in the New Testament and confirmed in the Quran, then what is its significance in light of the corrective measures provided in the Quran? Can the New Testament be read faithfully apart from the Christian doctrine of the atonement? Are there other advantages and purposes to be found from reading the gospel accounts? For Sayyid Ahmad, Jesus emphasized the inner ethic, the volition to be faithful to God, even unto death. The cross, in his understanding, was more about how one ought to live rather than how one can have assurance of eternal bliss. Eternal bliss, in his estimation, was granted through simple grace by faith in the one God. Christians, while appreciating this reason, might also say that there's more than the Gospels in the New Testament, and that these emphasizing the centrality of Christ's volition, sacrificial death, resurrection, and ascension are evident in many clear statements in the rest of the New Testament. So what do we do about those, and how do those factor in with our understanding of the atonement? But despite Sayyid Ahmad's ironic approach and personal goodwill, he admittedly left behind more questions than answers. He identified many commonalities shared by the Quran and the Bible, but his work has done little to resolve the perennial theological issues that set Muslim and Christians apart. But this is not all bad, and it was certainly not wasted effort. For if anything, he brings into sharp relief the importance of working together and promoting and participating in interfaith religious literacy, but also in coming to peace that some differences may never be resolved. But that despite this, people from different faiths, as Sayyid Ahmad demonstrated in his life, can eat together, work together, study together, and live together in building a more just, informed, and equitable society. It's interesting to look to the generation right after Sayyid Ahmad in language nearly identical to that used by Sayyid Ahmad, pertaining to this issue of what cannot be known, that which is hidden, for example, or that which is unclear. The Mutashabihat Farahi, which is probably his best known heir and highest scholar in that lineage behind him, goes on and takes that same language to say, all revelation in the Bible and Quran has flown from one pure spring. So naturally their parity and conformity is the outworking of God's power. And in conclusion, but the Quran commands that faith be placed upon the concealed, the mutashabihat, that which is beyond comprehension. And there is no reason why this command should not be applicable to that which is found in the other books, in the other heavenly Asmani books as well. If interactions were conducted in the spirit, then coexistence, he says, the possibility of reconciliation could occur over time, and love would emerge amongst the followers of these ancient traditions. And a spirit of patient humility can foster a relationship of mutual learning. This is certainly Sir Sayyid Ahmad's ethos and approach, even as he dealt with such a contentious issue and with painful clarity, managing to offend both sides, but somehow opening a door that others such as Farahi and Islahi and many today could move forward and ponder the significance of the cross, even for themselves as Muslims. Thank you. I'll stop here.